This time, Hogan's Heroes, Austria 1930-34, the Wunderteam.
No, nay, never. No, nay, never, no more. 'Cause I'll stay a wild rover forever and more.
Hello and welcome to By Far the Greatest Team, a podcast in which football fans attempt the impossible to rank once and for all who is the greatest football team of all time. My name is Graham Dunn. By this point, you think I had referenced every Oxford United reference I could in this podcast, but I'm still going to be striving to put in more. And joining me, as ever, is the king of the data, Jamie Rooney.
You're getting started with film references. Hogan's Heroes. I mean, that's stretching out there. I mean, we could tell you're the journalist of the bunch, that's for sure. Hello, Graham. It's great to be back and great to be talking about a team from almost 100 years ago. You know, I like the history ones more so than the more modern ones. In the last week, though, I've got to share this with you. I've been to the FIFA Museum. Wouldn't recommend going. It's okay. It's a bit glossy. I've also been to the Kip Stadium in Rotterdam, where Everton played Rapid Vienna, I think it was, in the European Cup Winners' Cup final in 1985, which is topical for today. And I went to the Wankdorf Stadium in Bern, which was super exciting because that's where West Germany beat the great Hungarians. And the Hungarians, I think, link into potentially what we're going to talk about tonight as well. But it was a disappointment. The Wankdorf Stadium is now, it's a multi-complex, young boys play there. And it's just a shopping centre with a multi-storey car park underneath. There was no museum I could go to kind of sense the history of where West Germany had this incredible victory over this brilliant Hungarian team. And it just kind of left me feeling a bit, well, Wankdorf, really.
Well, I'm glad you made the joke before I had to insert a similar style joke on there. You know, my childish sense of humour on such things. But I'm impressed with the international on tour of checking out some of these grounds. I'm very excited because I will aiming to pop by St. Pauli's Stadium next week, which I'm in Hamburg. So that'll be quite exciting, I have to say. One of our favourites, it has to be said. Whether they're playing Hell's Bells by AC/DC with the Great Funeral March out remains to be seen. But here we go. Yes, we are going back into history. And as you say, Jamie, this is your strong suit, the history of the game. Maybe you'll be hearing less from me than usual, as ever. I like that I titled this after Hogan's Heroes, after Jimmy Hogan, someone who I'd forgotten I had said last on a podcast a couple of weeks ago. I had no idea who he was. And I hadn't heard of him then. And he's still news to me now, even having done him on a podcast a couple of weeks ago. But fortunately, Jamie, we have an expert who can shine a lot more light on this story, or hopefully so. And some, if not on the story, then definitely our pronunciation, if nothing else, because I'm delighted we welcome to the podcast Benedikt Ost. Hi, Benedikt.
Hi, guys. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much. We have been the first of my pronunciation questions, of course, is whether it should be Wunderteam or Wunderteam. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I mean, in Austria, it's usually referred to the Wunderteam. This is the German term for it, but yeah, I think like the international term would be Wunderteam, but like the German term is Wunderteam, so I think both ways work.
Now, we're looking at this Austria side, and Jamie, what I've noticed is every time I think we got to the originators of total football, it's Hungary, and then you just keep throwing someone else out there. So this Austria side, there is a real claim for them being the originators of total football and arguably the world, the first greatest team, isn't there?
I think the question is more for Benedikt, to be honest. And we should really point out, we're doing this team today. It's been on our list for a while, but we're doing it because Benedikt contacted us and wanted to see if we wanted to cover this team. So I think it's only right that we throw the floor over to Benedikt on this, and this question is for him. Are they the originators, Benedikt, of the beautiful game?
I think certainly that you can make a case for it because, like, reading into it, and we will probably discuss it also, like, they played a really beautiful short passing game, also due to the influence of Jimmy Hogan, but also because like some of the players were really, really technically gifted players. And I also found another reason, like a guy you mentioned like in the very beginning briefly when you did the Hamburg episode, and maybe also a guy you came across when you are in Rotterdam, Ernst Happel, because he
Yes.
grew up in this area and he was also known for playing a total football. So he grew up during the era of the Wunderteam. So one can make a case that they are the originators of the total football.
Ernst Happel, that's a great shout. Probably
Uh,
regarded as, I mean, we're going to talk about Hugo Meisl, I'm sure, at some point through this team, but Ernst Happel, probably the greatest Austrian football manager of all time. Is that a fair statement, Benedikt?
yeah, it is. I mean, like it is the Ernst Happel Stadium where there was the
Yeah.
final for the Euros 2008, and he is widely regarded like by far the greatest Austrian football coach.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we've just given Graham enough time to Google who Ernst Happel is so he can get involved in this.
When it comes to sort of second division footballers in the English league in 1985, I don't need the extra time. So again, this story sort of comes to a head, I guess, in that period from 1930. Prior to that, is there sort of much origins for in terms of Austria? Where is Austrian football? Where is football full stop at that point?
This is like something that I think not easy to like narrow down. I mean, Austria was one of the in 1924 was the first European continental institution to introduce professional football. Austrian football was quite good, but to go back even earlier, I think we can also talk about the participation of Austria in the 1912 Olympic Games because that's also where they played. I mean, they were like it was this weird like sort of system where they then went into the consolation round and then
Yeah.
in the end were ranked sixth. So at the time, one of the like in continental Europe, it was I think one of the best teams back then.
The 1912 Olympic Games, I always like the slightly random tournament systems. Jamie, was that a random one?
Well, there was, I mean, 1912, I think it's the fourth Olympics where football was being held. And these were the World Championships at the time as well, because the World Cup didn't exist. So these are the World Championships of football. But yeah, it was, I think there was, I'm doing this off the top of my head, Graham, so thanks for that. I think it was like 8, maybe 9 teams, 10 teams that competed. They had like a prelim round, then they went through to a knockout. I think Austria lost in what would be considered a quarterfinal to the Netherlands.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
Great Britain went through, and I think they beat Denmark in the final, if memory serves.
Exactly. Like in the first game, they won 5-1 against Germany, and then they lost to the Netherlands, and then they went into the consolation rounds where they then, in the quarterfinal of the consolation round, they won against Norway. In the semifinal, they won against Italy 5-1, and in the final of the consolation final, they lost to Hungary 3-0. So in the end, they were ranked sixth. They were like quite okay.
Benedikt, you make a really good point about the professional league being set up in 1924, because it wasn't just a professional league. There was also the birth of probably, Thomas Lipton aside, the first international club competition that was set up, I think, in 1927, the Metropa Cup, which was for Austrian, Hungarian, Czech, and I think Italian and
like the Metropa Cup was mainly between like as you said like after the collapse of the Habsburg Empire, so it was Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary. Rapid Vienna reached the finals 3 times, won it once in 1930, and like Austria Vienna won the Metropa Cup twice in 1933 and 36.
Yes, I mean, this is a really important fact in European football because this is the first time that organised European football was taking place. This predates the European Cup, which we know started in 1955-56. But, this is 30 years ahead of that. And the Central European Belt is organising international football tournaments, and Austria are right behind that. So they've already got a head start as they get into the late 1920s, 30s to sow the seeds of what's going to become this Wunderteam.
I also like that they changed the name for one season only to the Danube Cup. Now that's a brilliant name. I think there's kind of, but obviously didn't take off. Perhaps they maybe, where was Milk back in 1957? That's what they needed. And just picking up on the influence of Scottish football, and obviously Scottish football and Scotland's involvement in the origins of the game is pretty high. But how does the Scottish connection play into this?
There were a lot of friendlies actually also from against Scottish teams, mainly like the big two, Rangers and Celtic, against Rapid Vienna, Austria Vienna, and also other clubs of Vienna, because like football at this time was mainly in Vienna. So outside Vienna there was not big professional club football. And that's basically like how they developed like the Scottish system, and Rapid Vienna trained starting from 1910, using the Scottish system in a way to develop football.
And Scotland, they're accredited with the passing game, and Benedict's already alluded to the fact that this Wunderteam played a short passing game. So I think the influence has definitely reached into the Austrian psyche in terms of this is how you play football. It's not what would have been played in the 1920s in English football generally, which have been kick and rush. And I think it's the reason why Jimmy Hogan, who had an influence on this team, but not a direct influence, more on Hugo Meisl, the manager, the coach, who is the architect of this Wunderteam, but probably had an influence in terms of how football can be played during Hogan's time when he was in Hungary at MTK Budapest.
Exactly. And I think like Hugo Meisl is also like, if we talk about the Wunderteam in Austria, we usually talk about Hugo Meisl. Like Jimmy Hogan is known to a few people as well, but mainly Hugo Meisl is known as he was architect of the team, and he was a bit of a like jack of all trades, because he played football and he also was a referee. Also at the 1912 Olympic Games, he refereed 2 games and spoke a lot of languages: Czech, German, Italian, which helped for establishing the Mitropa Cup. So he was a very big figure in how Austrian football developed during this time.
He's an absolutely central character to this, and he should be. I should have had him in the title at the beginning, but I couldn't think of a film reference connected to Hugo Meisl. So he has to take second billing, but he is an absolutely fascinating character, and I just love that his involvement in the game. And you've seen this isn't we've come across this before, Jamie, haven't we? Where we've had managers who have also been referees, the same referees. There seems to be this kind of general authority position where it's assumed that if you're senior enough to manage, then you can referee as well.
Hugo Meisl was a visionary. There's no doubt about that. When you just look through his contribution to football, he's ahead of his time, and that's probably why he's taken control of many of the responsibilities in the game, because he probably feels he can do them better than the others around him at that particular moment. He's more of a leader, I think, in terms of the full scale of where football's going, as opposed to just how it's being played on the football pitch. Is that fair, Benedikt?
That's very fair, and I think this is also like noted by like the duration. Like he started being the captain, like, or the coach of the national team in Austria. This time we didn't have the term like coach. The name is Verbandskapitän. Captain of association is the literal translation. I didn't find like what is the difference from a coach to Verbandskapitän, but he started in 1913. It was like his second job as coach. I mean, before then he was training one season the Wiener Amateures V, which then became Austria Vienna, and he's lasted until his death in 1937. So I think he's been in the game almost whole his life.
He was quite young as well when he took charge of the Austrian national team. He was still in his 30s, I think.
He was born in 1881, so he was 32. So which would be really, really young today. I don't know if there's any like national team coach who is 32 years old. Their role was only interrupted by his military service during World War I. So this was the only time where he was not coach of the Austrian national team.
This will play into the story throughout this, but this happening in the interwar period has a real impact obviously in how the story ends, but also in where football's come from to get into that situation. So you have Meisl, and then Jeremy, how does Jimmy Hogan get involved?
He's a bit of a journeyman. You would love his Wikipedia page, Graham, in terms of the teams he's managed and where he's managed. I'm surprised you haven't got that there in front of you. But he finds his way into Central Europe through the 1920s after the First World War. And then he starts having a bit of an influence on others. Victoria Pozzo, I think he was friends with Herbert Chapman as well. So he's in a collective of inspirational leaders of football in the game at that particular moment.
I noticed that he played 9 games for Swindon, and then that was that. I sort of, but I love actually. It is sort of fascinating that he achieves all this. What's really intriguing, Hogan does go on to get some recognition in his homeland in English football with Aston Villa, doesn't he? But for that most of that period, particularly that interwar period, it is all in Europe, isn't it? There's no appreciation. There's something. It says something about where the English game is at the time that here you have this revolutionary coach, somebody who is seen as having been instrumental in the start of total football, and he lasts, I think, 30 games at Fulham before they bin him off.
It's really interested in this. Sorry, Benedikt, just to quickly go on Hogan. We won't focus on Hogan anymore beyond this. Graham's obsession needs to go away because there's other things to talk about. But
I totally agree. Like his Wikipedia page, it was a big enjoyment reading it.
Yeah, big influence in Europe. And I think Jonathan Wilson, who's written loads of books on football, especially football in Europe, he saw Hogan as like a forgotten hero in England. He had football tactics and he understood the technical side of the game. But I think his ideas were bigger than what the game was at that particular moment. So he just became unpopular. So he probably had to go elsewhere for him to have an influence. And his influence was England's loss, but the Netherlands, Switzerland, Hungary, and Austria's gain.
And it is pretty incredible, the change in Austria's fortunes, I suppose, because 1930, the World Cup. So Austria aren't at that World Cup, are they? So they go from this sort of standing start to sort of become the strongest team in the world, probably, definitely in Europe at the time.
They didn't go to the 1930 World Cup. Mainly, I think the same reasons as other big nations didn't go there, because it was in Uruguay and it was a very long and exhausting time to go there. So they didn't go there. Around the 1930, actually, the clubs were really successful, as we already talked about. But the national team, they struggled. Like in 10 games, they lost 4 games, 3 draws and 3 wins around this 30. So before the Wunderteam emerged, it was sort of it was okay, but they didn't were in a successful state.
And what was it that triggered the change around? Because from 31 onwards, they really become a force. What was the triggers?
I think now is the time that we have to mention the name Matthias Sindelar, because Matthias Sindelar was dropped in the late 1920s because Hugo Meisl, after they lost against a South German selection, basically it was the team of Greuther Fürth, who are now playing in the second German Bundesliga. They lost 5-0, and Sindelar was playing there and lost the ball very often. And on the way back, Hugo Meisl sort of was quite mad. Then he dropped him and didn't pick him for 14 games straight. And then basically they were playing Scotland. And Scotland was never defeated in continental Europe before. And what we have to take into account, the life in Vienna was a lot in the cafes in Vienna. So Hugo Meisl was a lot in cafes at the time and was meeting with journalists, and they pressured him that he shall use Sindelar, and he was always refusing. But then unexpectedly he sort of gave them 2 days before the game against Scotland. He gave them the lineup, and Sindelar was playing. yeah, and that was basically how it started, because then they were playing Scotland, and they won 5-0, which was then the first defeat of Scotland in continental Europe.
He's sort of somewhere between the Glenn Hoddle or the Matt Letitia of the game. This like undoubted talent, but I love I sort of love the story that there was football pundits and commentators and so forth almost had to make an intervention. He's kind of
Yeah.
you really must play this guy.
I think what fascinates me with that bit is the influence, because you hear about it, the Vietnamese coffee shops and the coffee culture going on in Vienna at that particular moment. I mean, that just kind of takes me back into this whole world where everything is being decided over a cup of coffee in these coffee houses in Vienna. It's fantastic.
Exactly, and also like shortly before the game against Scotland, Meisl, as he was like really reluctant to let Sindelar play, he warned him. He was saying, "You don't lose the ball because this is a very important game." So he was still not quite sure whether it shall work, as it was like a different approach he had. It worked, as like Sindelar did what he was able to do so and led Austria to a 5-0 victory.
Just on Sindelar, Benedikt, I mean, from my perspective, having an appreciation of football history, I learned about him some time ago, and I realised that he was one of the greats. But I had to really go scraping around to discover who this player was. And for comparison, Graham, he's kind of like, in what we would put the Messis and Ronaldos of the last 20 years. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Sindelar was in that bracket. How is he viewed in Austria as a football player?
As a pure football player, he's still like regarded one of the all-time greats, because, as you said, he was probably like around the time he was probably one of the best footballers in the world. I mean, even for the Austrian team, he scored I think 30 goals, which is still he is up there, And also there were a few games also like against Hungary later, when we won 8-2, he scored 3 goals and assisted the other 5. So he was
That's crazy.
his role like after Austria joined Nazi Germany is still not quite sure, because I mean there is this reports of him like when there was the game Austria against Germany after the Anschluss, where he sort of scored a goal and provoked in support of the Nazis. But at the same time, there are also reports that he like acquired a cafe from a Jewish owner for very little money. So from a pure football perspective, he's still regarded like one of the all-time greats. But his role after the Anschluss is now viewed like differently, because we don't know, and I think a lot of it is also due to the fact that we still don't know like how he died, because there are also all sort kind of rumors and stuff how this had happened.
I think the official line is it carbon monoxide poisoning in his flat with, I think, his girlfriend or wife in 1939. So this is just as the beginning of when war is started in Europe. And I think there's a mystery around whether his antics on the football pitch against the German team in the 38 game was that whether they did contribute to some kind of mysterious death.
Exactly.
But it's quite interesting, isn't it, that the reputation on the pitch lasts so long, especially given the relative lack of footage of him playing. Normally, you sort of I think we've talked about this before, Jamie, that one of the reasons Pele is so fondly remembered is that he's in this fantastic Technicolor era of football, and you have these unbelievable moments of skill which are captured and played over and over, and in the first bits of color all gloriously. But presumably there isn't that much footage available of Sindelar doing his thing.
Yeah, but I think as we talked about, like they were professionals back then, and Sindelar was also, he had numerous advertising contracts for suits, watches, and dairy products. So he was a known figure also for people around the time who were not that into football. So he was one of the first footballers probably like in Central Europe who knew how to advertise himself. Like even today you can find advertising stuff from this time.
I'm not going to keep saying the so-and-so of today, but very much the David Beckham of his day. I'm just going to carry on. I just keep finding people to go and reference them to. I love his. I love his nickname as well, the Paper Man.
The Paper Man.
That's so good. That's so good, and that's because of his sort of relative slightness.
Exactly. That is the main reason why he was named like that. So because he dribbled, which was not like, and he was also very skinny, so it all was fitting in a way, like his whole movement. That was why he was named the Paper Man.
Benedikt, you mentioned the 5-0 thrashing of Scotland. The Austrians have been influenced by the Scots, and now they've actually smacked them at their own game. I think that was a third of what was to become a 14-game unbeaten run, which back in those days was quite something, considering the levels of football that was going on in the 1930s in Central Europe.
Exactly. Then afterwards played Germany twice and also Switzerland, but in like the Switzerland game, I mean they won all three, but the Switzerland game, which is sandwiched in between the two German games against Germany, is not always labeled as game of the Wunderteam, as it was a heavily altered team because the stars were involved in the Mitropa Cup, because there was no interlull as there is today. So the players had to decide between the national team and the club footballs. They won 6-0 against Germany, which was the game after Scotland. And this was also was then referred in Germany as one of the biggest disgraces. So Germany's biggest disgrace.
I think it gets worse a couple of months later.
That's true. And then when they played again against Germany, then they won 5-0. This was the first time they were playing at the new Vienna Stadium, which then later was renamed to the Ernst Happel Stadium after Ernst Happel died in 1992, I think. And this was the first time the term Wunderteam sort of became common, because the thrashing of Scotland and the wins against Germany, which is still of course today, but also back then, is still kind of an arch rival. So, and this was the first time it was referred the term Wunderteam sort of became quite common. And Hugo Meisl, he hated the term. He was quite frank about it in an interview, where he said nonsense, that the idiots who gave it the name should be hanged. The cursed phrase follows you everywhere. So he was really straight about it. He didn't like the term. But yeah, this was then how it started. I mean, then they were playing Hungary, which was quite common back then, that Austria played against Hungary. And they drew 2-2, but they missed the penalty, and also they played only with 10 men from the 75th minute on, as there were no substitutes. One player got injured, and this run just kept on going.
Yeah, so Benedikt, all of these games are going on in the kind of the 1931-32 era, when Austria also competed in the Central European International Cup, I think it was called, which is basically the forerunner to what we know as the UEFA European Championships, which began in 1960. So this is already a competition for international teams going on, and Austria are right in the thick of this.
That's true. Like some of the games, like the game against Hungary, was also part of the competition of the Central European International Cup, or it's a Czech pronunciation, the Svela Cup, as it was named after I think the foreign minister of Czechoslovakia. And it was mainly a competition between, I think, Italy, Hungary, Switzerland, Austria, obviously, and I think also Czechoslovakia. So some of the games were also part of this competition, as it was played in a league format.
Yeah, it was home and away, wasn't it? They played a total of 8 games, home and away. I think it's interesting as well, because you mentioned the Swiss friendly that Austria won 2-0, sandwiched between the games against Germany, where the Wunderteam have gone off to play for their clubs in the Metropa Cup. It's a bit like, I don't know, the equivalent of Players Day going off to play in the Champions League for their clubs above playing for their international teams in a friendly. I mean, that would never happen these days, would it? Club before country. But in the European Central International Tournament that's going on, Austria do play Switzerland, and I think it is the Wunderteam that plays against Switzerland in Switzerland. That's a pretty convincing win, that one, isn't it, Benedikt?
Yeah, it was a pretty convincing win. I mean, the scoreline was pretty close. It was an 8-1 with Anton Schall. I think a player we didn't mention, because if you look like at this, Sindelar didn't score the most goals. It was Anton Schall, and this was they were the main players that were playing in the forward line, and Anton Schall was scoring a hat-trick at that game. I mean, it was quite an dominating 8-1 win against Switzerland.
That was what I was going to come on to. Obviously, we talked about Sindelar, but this is more than just one player. So, Benedikt, which other kind of players sort of stand out in that side?
Yeah, I think Anton Schall is probably also a player, as he was scoring. I think in total the Wunderteam was scoring 65 goals, and Anton Schall was scoring 19 of them. Another player we have to mention is probably also Vogel. He is also the last player of the Wunderteam who died. He died in 1993, and also the keeper Rudolf Fieden. He was because Rudolf Fieden was also one player. Hugo Meisl first probably started against Scotland because he was using a different goalkeeper before then, and these are some figures. And another player I want to mention, he was playing quite regular for it, is Walter Nausch, because Walter Nausch later came on, because you were talking about the 1954 World Cup also, and Austria was also, as you were talking back then, quite good, and was third in the end. And Walter Nausch was the coach of the.
Oh wow!
He is also a figure I want to mention from this team.
Yeah, from what I've understood from Walter Nausch, he was what we would call today a kind of a DMC, a defensive midfielder. I think he was one of those ones that would provide a defensive line to the defence, but also help the forwards. And we should point out, it's 5 forwards, isn't it, Benedikt? I think in this Austria team, 5 forwards that are interchanging, playing a short passing game. So this is where the links come to the influence on the Hungary team, which also has an influence on the Dutch team of the 1970s, which gives us the term total football. Austria invented total football.
That's true. It was basically a 2-3-5 formation. With a lot of interchanging players, and Sindelar and Schall and Kreidel, I think was the third quite common name. They were leading the line.
When I look through some of the sides, there are a remarkable number of forwards and kind of positive players who make them, and that's even before we start talking about Joseph Bican or Baikan. who now he's definitely a goal scorer, isn't he?
He's a goal scorer, yeah. I mean, he was not necessarily. He was then part later on of the 1934 team who was at the World Cup. During this time, I think because he was quite young at the time, he played games for Austria, but also for Czechia mostly. So.
Oh wow.
I think most because he then 1937 or so he went to Czechia and played then on for the Czech national team, and also I think only in Czechia until his career end.
Yeah, I think he gets involved in the Wunderteam just before the 34 World Cup. And I think it's a critical period as well, Benedikt. Maybe you can help explain. I think it's almost like the period where the team has reached its peak in 33 going into that 34 World Cup, and not only that, they're competing against an Italian team who are on home soil, where they've got a bit of a loony in charge of the country who's using the World Cup as a bit of propaganda.
The run they came, the basically ended like in 1933. I mean, a game we probably still have to talk about is the game against England was the only defeat, and still it is like the defeat is the game that was talked about the most, because England was unbeaten at home, and this is a record. Jamie, you will probably know it. It kept on going until the 50th. Teams from continental Europe, they never managed to score more than a consolation goal. Austria went there and went 2-0 down, and then started a game, and the English media, that was really impressed by it, because even like the Prince George, he was watching and he was greeting the Austrian national team. And there is also quite a funny story, because Karl Sester, one of the defenders, he remarked that being a footballer must be a wonderful profession, and Karl Sester replied word for word, "But you don't have a bad job either, Your Majesty." So this is something I think which also, like, they were playing with humor, and they were just of this was like the whole, it perfectly just fits in the life in Vienna, I think, back then. So
Yeah, I think it's probably key to point out as well. I mean, England at this time had an on-off relationship with FIFA. They were in, they were out. It was a bit like the hokey cokey, really, right up until about the 1950s. And England kind of viewed themselves inwardly as the world champions, even though they hadn't competed at any World Cup. And they couldn't see the need to go
Nothing
and prove
nothing has changed. Nothing
I know,
has changed
I know,
there.
I know. As I
Nothing
was
has
saying that, I was
changed.
thinking, I still think we're world champions.
Don't let 60 years to the contrary tell you anything else.
Yeah, but it was a period of time where England were not competing in the World Cup. England didn't compete in their first World Cup until 1950, and even then it took some gentle persuasion from FIFA to get them in there. So playing the likes of Austria during this period would have been seen as the kind of a heavyweight battle. And it was a narrow victory, 4-3 at Stamford Bridge, not at Wembley. But yeah, I mean, it's a credible result for Austria. And if anyone at the FA at the moment is unsure about England's place in the world, they should be taking note. But it still didn't seem to get the message. I think they had to wait another 20 years till the Hungarians turned up and properly showed the team how to play football.
yeah, and this was also stressed out because, like, one of the main figures of English football back then, and as I'm an Arsenal supporter, I'm quite happy to say it was Herbert Chapman. And Herbert Chapman wrote a letter to Hugo Meisl after the game, and just like was saying that like all their legislators, all their football managers are quoting their theme, how wonderful they played. So this is something that was quite big. And he also wanted Sindelar. He offered after the game, he wanted Sindelar to join Arsenal, but Sindelar refused. He offered him 40k pounds, but Sindelar, who was like living still in the apartment of his mother, he refused.
So Sindelar could have appeared in the Arsenal Stadium mystery.
Exactly, yeah. Wow. He could have played a key figure role in the Arsenal mystery in 1939. Which I didn't mention before, he was an actor in 1938. He played a role in a movie, in a Hungarian movie. Yeah. It was something like Rooney and the Wunderteam. And yeah.
What you definitely do, what I've noticed is a lot of people who rise to the top in football, both as players, managers, and administrators, they are all kind of super skilled. They all kind of, turn out to be successful football commentators or managers or actors, or I can't remember. There was somebody we talked, I think, who once he gave up, just became a hugely successful football journalist. They just seem to have these multi-talented skills. Acting is definitely something that appears to be in footballers' blood in the 1930s. I hadn't realised that Sindelar had form in this regard.
I mean, to be fair, he basically played himself because the name of the movie was Roxy and Her Wunderteam. It was in the early 1938, and he basically played himself.
Fantastic. Michael Caine was a better actor than a footballer, though, I'd say.
Definitely so. We should. I think we should start to take a look at this side's performance in tournaments, which I think is quite an interesting part, which we'll take a look at in the second part. But Jamie, you brought Joseph. Well, I brought Joseph Bican up, but you mentioned him to me. Do you want to just go through his goal return, because it is quite something, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Benedikt can probably do it better than I can, but I think history has a strange way of calculating goals. Pele's the greatest example of that. Pele has scored, 10,000 goals unofficially, against goals that count when he's playing football against his grandmother in the garden, I think. But Joseph Biscan, I think he scored somewhere in the region officially, according to the International History Football Statistics website, or affiliation actually. I think 960 odd goals, and maybe a few more than that. But I think records show that maybe he scored over 1,500 goals. But I think Benedikt, you help me out here. Biscan,
Yeah.
where does he rank?
I even found numbers of 5,000. So this is crazy. But probably it's the same story as with Pele. We don't know how goals were counted at the time, but he at least he scored almost 1,000 goals in, I think, 600 official matches. And also most of them for Slavia Prague, I think, where he scored almost 600 goals in, I think, 300 official matches. But before he went on to play in Czechoslovakia, he was also part of the Austria, and also was scoring 14 goals in 19 games for the Austrian national team. Actually, his goal record is better for Austria than for Czechoslovakia, but I think this is mainly due to the Second World War, as he only played 14 games then for Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, I think his career average officially, and this is officially, is 1.5 goals per game.
Yeah.
His record at Slavia Prague, as Benedikt mentioned, I think it's 2 goals a game. I literally think it's 2 goals a game. It's just staggering. Was he just playing under 10s every week?
Yeah, this is crazy. This is probably still would be a what if, what would have happened if there would not have been an interruption during the Second World War, how he would have played, and how he also how his international career would have developed.
We're profiling Jimmy Hogan, Hugo Meisl, Matthias Sindelar, Joseph Biscan, players that have absolute standing in the history of the game.
They influenced each other in a very big manner. So this is, I think, these are figures football as it is now would probably not be as the football is today if there weren't these figures back in that time.
When you were talking about Herbert Chaplin writing a letter to Hugo Meisl after the Austria game against England at Stamford Bridge, I couldn't help but draw parallels between the two of them. They both had bitty playing careers. They both started managing at quite a young age. They're both visionaries of the game. They both did things in a kind of a forward-thinking way in terms of how they wanted to develop the game. And sadly, they both left this world way before their time in the late 1930s. Both of them were to depart way sooner than they should have.
Exactly. I mean, with Chapman, I think it was pneumonia, and Hugo Meisl suffered a heart attack in 1937. I mean, as he was half Jewish, it would probably sadly his national career as a football coach would probably have ended anyway. But he died way too soon. That's pretty sure.
We are going to take a look at this team in tournaments and sort of, I guess, ask the question of whether they actually achieved everything that they might have, and if so, why not? And we'll do that in the second half. Hi, Graham here. We're just about wrapping up our plans for this current season, but we're already turning our attentions to our next season. If you've been listening, if there are some teams you would like us to cover, or would even like to come on and talk about those teams, you can contact us, drop us a line. How do they get hold of us, Jamie?
Well, they can get hold of us by using the social media accounts, X or Blue Sky, where we have the same handles. We've got yourself at Said and Dunn and myself, Couch Pundito. So Couch Pundito at Blue Sky and Said and Dunn at Blue Sky, or on the X, aka Twitter equivalent.
And you can also get hold of us on Insta, which I think the kids call it these days. What's our handle on that one?
Yes, we're on Instagram, where we're trying to share some of our little videos. So please give us a like, a follow, and keep in touch with our little videos. So we are on Instagram as the Greatest Team Football Podcast, or by far the Greatest Team Football Podcast. Search for either of those and you'll find us. Please follow.
Okay, so welcome back. We are talking about the Wunderteam, Hugo Meisl's fantastic side. And we've been talking so far about some of the stars of this team and the brilliant run that they went on, which really earned them this reputation as the Wunderteam, even if Meisl didn't like the term. But maybe one of the reasons that this team is maybe not given the kind to the likes of me, someone who has only a casual understanding of football before 1986. And I think part of the reason this side is perhaps a little underappreciated, maybe more widely, or goes under the radar a bit, is that they don't win a major tournament or even get their World Cup performances are a bit, for lots of complicated reasons, are not, they don't get the reputation they do. But I think what is interesting about this side is there are a run of tournaments, and obviously 1934 is probably their big moment for this side. And along the way, and Jamie, you referred to this a bit earlier, Italy do keep coming in. They do keep their fortunes seem to be very tightly tied into those of Italy, who end up stealing quite a lot of the silverware over that period.
Yeah, Italy, they were at the Central European Cup. They were when Austria won it, during the period until 1933, they lost against Italy the first game. Then the second game they won. And obviously, one of the key figures of Italy at that time was Giuseppe Meazza. I heard a stadium is named after him. And they were Austria had a friendly against Italy just before the World Cup and won 4-2, leading 3-0, I think, at halftime. So Austria went into the World Cup as one of the favorites. It started the tournament started with the round of 16, where they won against France after extra time. And then they were playing against Hungary again, where they won 2-1. And in the semifinals, they were playing against Italy. As the tournament was in Italy, the referee was a Swedish guy named Ivan Eklund, and he was a personal guest of honor of Mussolini the day before. So they were playing against them, went 1-0 down, but also the goal, as there were reports of that the keeper of the Austrian team, Peter Platzer, he was pushed by Italians, and still Italy scored, and it became very obscure because he even took an active part, the referee, Ivan Eklund, he took an active part in the game himself when he was heading away across to the to the freestanding striker Karl Cziczek, and Austria lost 1-0 in the end. So this would have been the massive opportunity, and of course, we still don't know what to this day what would have happened, and but this whole circumstances of Ivan Eklund and the refereeing of him, there are like rumors that he has been bribed, but of course, like him being an active like personal guest of honor the day before, it's like imagine something of that happening today.
Wow. Yeah, I think imagine something like that happened in 1978.
Yeah.
We could definitely
Where we
imagine.
can like where also Ernst Happel was involved. So
yeah, it's true. Yeah, really good shout. Yeah,
yeah, he was like the coach of the Netherlands back then.
Netherlands. Yeah.
It's an interesting World Cup, this one, because it's very European. Obviously, I mean, I enjoy that a lot. Uruguay, who are probably the strongest team in the world at that stage, had completely thrown their toys out of the pram and refused to travel over because no one went over to Uruguay 4 years before. So it's quite a heavily European weighted tournament, isn't it?
Well, you like the format first and foremost, Graham. It's 16 teams. The first time it's a straight knockout from round one through to the final. I think there's some debate over Uruguay because Uruguay, it's 4 years since they were world champions, and before that, Olympic champions in 28 and 24. So there could be some debate that this Uruguayan team, they're just too old to travel on the boat for 2 weeks to get to Italy. But yeah, there was definitely some toys out of the pram. But whether they would have been the strongest team, and I think there is some debate.
Hang on, too old to travel on the boat? I mean, what are cruises for? Have you been on a cruise? Have you seen what the average age of a cruise traveller is? If anything, they're not old enough.
I'll take your word for it, Graham. So, but yeah, I think there is a very fundamental political exercise going on during this World Cup, as Benedikt's alluded to, with special invites, personal invites to referees from the leader of Italy, Benito Mussolini. So I think it's possibly the first World Cup. It has to be the first World Cup where propaganda is probably taking some form of shape. First sports event where political propaganda is taking some kind of shape. Is that me being cynical, Benedikt, or is that how it's viewed in Austria?
No, I think you're probably like making a good point because Eklund also refereed the final, and I think this is not common that if you're refereeing the semi-final, you're not refereeing the final. And also in the final, I mean, there were reports. I mean, I didn't dig deep. I think when they were playing Czechoslovakia in the final, but there were also apparently stuff going on was what needs to be discussed on. But yeah, of course, sports was popular, and of course this was used for propaganda, and this happened throughout this time and also later on in Nazi Germany, I mean 1936, the Olympic Games, something that happened during that time.
I don't know if it's 100% bona fide, but I think there is footage of the Italian goal on YouTube. I think it's there's literally a handful of minutes of the 1934 World Cup available. And this is a time where cameras were massive. Cameras were like 6 foot tall on tripods and needed to be carried around. And they were generally, there was no telephoto lens, so they were generally behind the goal. So the footage is a bit patchy. But I think it's a goal on YouTube, Benedikt? It's a scramble and all bodies are flying everywhere and the ball just kind of rolls over the line.
Yeah, at least it's I mean, it looks like it. Let's put it like that.
And I think the pitch as well was not conducive to the short passing game, which Austria was so great at.
This was also something I think that we have to consider. I mean, you were talking a time ago about Luton Town in the 80s when they had the artificial pitch, and I think for the same reasons, Austria, of course we also see it today, that big teams when they're playing in cup competitions against smaller teams away at their home, and this is a very different pitch. They struggle, and this is I think something that also was for Austria that they couldn't play their game that well, and that's probably something what also needs to be mentioned. Like the last game of the Wunderteam, like at least the one was against France where they won 4-0, and the goalkeeper of Austria, Rudolf Hien, whom I mentioned before, he then stayed in France and joined Racing Club Paris. I think Jimmy Hogan also was coach of Racing Club Paris during that time, so he stayed and he didn't come back for to the Austrian national team. He later played even I think a few games for France. So all this stuff happened, and that's why I think Austria was still regarded one of the big favorites, but it was a weakened team compared to the 1932-1933 period.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the Wonder Team was on a demise when it went into that World Cup in '34, regardless of all the other stuff that was going on. Still very strong, but not at the
That's
peak.
true.
And they were at their peak in '33 when they won the Central European International Cup, where they did top the group ahead of Italy. So their record against Italy, I think it's over this period. I think it's played 4, and they've both won 2 games each.
Unfortunately, like we lost at least one of the key games, like because I mean probably if we would have lost like one of the games that was played for during the European International Cup, we would not have won that. But like losing a semi-final, it still hurt because I think this was the time where it could have worked. I mean, Austria was 20 years later. They were in the semifinals, and you were talking about it when you were talking about the Germany team, where Austria lost 6-1. So, but in 1954, Austria were not regarded as big favorites of the competition. They were still like they had outsiders chances, but they were not big favorites. But at that time, they were one of the favorites. So this is something that's very unfortunate.
And I think there is a sort of an argument that this team is quite unlucky in terms of its timings of everything. I think there's definitely an argument that this side could have done pretty well in 1930 even. But if nothing else, the experience of playing a World Cup would make quite a difference for some of those players, and they kind of miss out on a tournament there. They are definitely at their prime in that 32-33 period. They're a little unlucky by the time to get 34, and then obviously everything sort of changes afterwards.
That's true, because also like in the 1934 World Cup, they were playing all the teams they already played the years before. They were playing France, they played them and won 4-0. Then they played Hungary, against they played like numerous times during the time, and also Italy, as we were talking about, they played already. And also the consolation game, the third place playoff, they played Germany, so another team, and lost 3-2, and were then ranked 4th and came back to Vienna, and the fans were booing and very disappointed, which happened also 20 years later. Also in 1954, fans were disappointed.
After losing 6-1 in the semi-final, you've probably got...
Yeah.
Wow.
And there was also like, we can go in a very different rabbit hole also again, because Ensemble was the player back then, we could go in another. But this is a story for a different podcast, I think.
I think the quarterfinal against Switzerland could just be a podcast in its own right as well. I mean, one of the most incredible games of football in World Cup history, 7-5.
Yeah.
But Graham, you mentioned it, and Benedikt's kind of alluded to the opponents that Austria are facing during this World Cup in '34. 1934 is the only time in World Cup history that all 8 quarter-finalists have been from the continent of Europe. It's the only time it's ever happened, primarily because it was European teams. Brazil were there, Argentina were there, United States were there, and also I think Egypt were competing in the World Cup.
Didn't miss the boat this time.
Yeah, and that's something I think because like Argentina and Brazil managed to travel to Italy, so Uruguay could have gone there because Argentina and Brazil managed to do that as well.
So this team starts to disband, I guess, after this point, but there's still sort of tournaments they They back in Italy the following year in the Central European Cup. All tournaments apparently being played in Mussolini's Italy at this time for some reason. Another creditable performance, but they again miss out to Italy in that tournament. And then we get to the Summer Olympic. We get to the Olympics in 1936, and that's a very different side.
That's true. I mean, I think this is mainly because at the time only amateurs were allowed to play in the Olympic Games, and the Austrian league was as we talked about was a professional league. So all these stars we were talking about were not allowed to play. So this was a highly altered team with none. There was not a single player who was part of the Wunderteam who was part, except the coach of the team, which was Jimmy Hogan.
keeps coming back.
Yeah.
I have a feeling you're not going to forget about him this time, Feb. That is an important point, Benedikt, isn't it? Because I think history sometimes mixes the Olympic final with the 1934 semi-final team, where it is two different competitions under two different umbrellas and two very different sides. They're not one of the same.
Exactly. And as said, like, because I know like the key figures of the Wunderteam of the 1934 team, like Sindelar, Bichan, the players, we know them. But like of the 1936 Olympic Games, I cannot name any of the players. Like except the coach Jimmy Hogan. There were again some dubious stuff going on, like, but now like Austria and the lucky end because Austria should have gone out, I think, in the quarterfinal against Peru because
Yes,
they
it's
lost.
true. Yeah, this is fantastic.
Yeah, they lost after extra time, and there were even 3 more disallowed goals. So Austria, one can say, like, was quite lucky because and looking at the Peruvian side, they were quite good. Like they smashed Finland 7-3 before the game. So Austria then, like, the problem was like apparently Peruvian fans stormed the pitch and the game was interrupted and they wanted to do a replay, but Peru refused to do the replay, and so Austria went to the next round.
And Peru went home as well. And what's fascinating about that, there must have been some kind of boat share because I think the Colombians, the Brazilians, and the Argentinians competing in other tournaments, not just the football, went home with the Peruvians.
That's crazy. I didn't know that. So, as like Austria was then like it was a walkover for Austria. Austria then was in the semifinals where they played against Poland. They won 3-1. And then in the finals, they again, obviously, it had to be Italy, and lost 2-1. And in the 92nd minute, so it was in extra time. So they lost straight. They lost again after extra times. But to be fair, they probably should have never been there because they were very, very lucky with the Peru game.
There is just something about Peru and big global tournaments, isn't there? It's it does seem to.
But the Wunderteam are still competing, albeit in they're definitely in a downward trend. But they do qualify for the 1938 World Cup, but they don't get the chance to take part, do they?
No, they didn't. I mean, like, qualifying for it was technically quite easy because they only had to play one game.
But the game, presumably, the game was against.
It wasn't Italy.
The game was
against a really good. The game was against a really good side, was it?
It was Latvia. Yeah, like the qualification of the 1938 tournament, like, it's crazy because there were like 10, I think 12, 13 different groups, some with only 2 teams, some with 3 teams, some didn't compete. So I think the Netherlands went straight to the World Cup because they would have played Egypt, but Egypt refused to play. There was all kind of crazy stuff going on, and the same goes for Austria. Like Austria, as probably you did as well. I was looking how they like sort of drew the the groups, and it was because of allocation where teams are, and I was like, Austria, Latvia, that's not the closest
No.
opponent, and yeah, but Austria won against Latvia. Would have been at the World Cup, but then yeah, one of the darkest period of Austrian history started. The Anschluss started. Austria became part of Nazi Germany, and the Austrian national team and also the Austrian league was dissolved, which was quite a big thing because it was a professional league, and they were also one of the like the Mitropa Cup. Sindelar won it in 1936, so they were still like in club football. The clubs are still very, very good.
And of course, by this stage, Hugo Meisl has died as well. Who's obviously, as you say, that there'd been it'd have been a challenge. What would have happened in terms of he's unlikely to be involved in the management of the side anyway, given everything that was going on. But his death in 1937, I guess, is sort of almost draws to the end that the Wunderteam period.
I think there were like two parts. One of them was like this amazing run before the 1934 World Cup, and then again like there were the games between the 1934 World Cup and the 1938 qualification against Latvia, which probably be I didn't look up if there was a game afterwards after the qualification, but probably this would be like the end of the Wunderteam, obviously after the Anschluss. Like on club football, like Rapid Vienna managed once to win the German Cup, I think, which is one odd statistics that like an Austrian team has won. The,
True. Good.
the,
That's a really good stat. I like that a lot.
and also I think it was a crazy game against Schalke. I think they won 4-3 with another player, Anton Binder, who has like scored almost 1,000 goals. But yeah, basically the time ended with the Anschluss. Some of the players died in the war. Karl Gall died 1943 in Russia. Some went to Sweden. Walter Nausch, for example, whom we talked about, like the coach of the 1954 team, he would have become coach. He could have become coach of the Austria Vienna, but only under the condition that he gets divorced from his Jewish wife. But he refused, and he said, "No, I'm not getting divorced," and went to Switzerland for that time. And it took some effort to bring him back after the World War ended, and then he became coach of Austria Vienna after the Second World War, and then later on, obviously, of the 1954 team. We all know the story from Matthias Sindelar, but also the other players. Most of them were not able to play during that time, so for various reasons. And obviously, what we also have to take into account, they were also getting old. I mean, Sindelar was already 35 when in 1938, so obviously also like it's not getting easier.
Yes, and I think Schindler talks about his age as the kind of the most diplomatic answer, I guess, or reason why he doesn't sort of make himself available for the 1938 World Cup squad, by which time obviously they're playing under the German banner.
There are a number of Austrians in that World Cup squad for Germany as well. I don't know the exact number, Benedikt, but I think it's good 8 or 9, maybe 10. I don't know. And Sepp Herberger has selected them. So after the Latvia win, where they qualified for the 38 World Cup, they do play 2 games against Hungary and Czechoslovakia. They lose them both in the Central European International Cup, and they finish 4th out of 5. So the demise, you can feel the demise. But obviously, there's something a bit more serious that's kind of building that's probably taking people's attention. And I bet it kind of you mentioned it. So there is a game arranged, and I think it's where Matthias Sindelar isn't really in favour of it, but does participate in what is a trial between Austria and Germany for Sepp Herberger to cherry pick the best players to go to the 1938 World Cup. And from the things I've read, I think Schindler, even though he participated, was never really fully on board or back in the idea of this.
There is like this myth about him like being very adamant that Austria plays in white and red, and that he provokesly like for during the game, there was a game before, and Austria against Wales, sort of this selection game, and where Schindler sort of he grew old, and he got old, and he in a way there were readings that he sort of didn't fit into the team of Sepp Herberger, and that Sepp Herberger sort of he wanted him, of course, because he was still an asset, but Schindler was not very keen on playing under these circumstances. But as far as I read, also because like the system was a very different. So the whole like story about Schindler after like the Anschluss is still something where there it goes in all directions. What people are writing.
Yeah, you struggle to work out whether he's a hero or otherwise, and of course it's probably quite difficult to actually get any clear evidence one way or the other. You know, what's really clear is, we sort of talked about the timing and that side was unlucky really with when the 30, not only with when the 34 World Cup happened, but the way it happened, drawing Italy in the semi final under some pretty extreme circumstances. But the breakup of this team and really the legacy that Austria had built up at this stage, because obviously you can't go through everything that Austria had been through during the war and this period, and then kind of rebuilding from the other side. It sort of brings to an end this kind of golden period far too early.
Football in Austria, I mean, it didn't stop because there was still like the German league going on, but like the whole development that was started by Hugo Meisl and Jimmy Hogan, how like football clubs work, that stopped because like, especially like for example in Austria, Vienna, there were a lot of Jewish key figures, and of course they all were dismissed after the Anschluss, and this also like stopped like the development of the club. So there also had to be a rebuild after World War II ended, and also like the painting of the Wunderteam of the time. This is something that still like people know it, and this is also like what if we are talking about the Wunderteam, we are talking about these 16 players that are on this oil painting, as we were briefly talking, like after the Anschluss and after World War II, during World War II, like the stories went in very different directions. So of these players,
it does feel that Austria have really been affected by this from a football perspective, more than most or any other nation, really. Because I mean, I couldn't help but looking up. You got this incredible team in the 1930s, and it kind of softly carries on into the 1950s, and then it does disperse. But and you got the Austrian teams doing really well in the Matropa Cup. The Vienna teams dominating and winning titles. But then I looked up in European competitions, which started in the 1950s. Only 3 Austrian teams have got to a Cup Winners' Cup final. They all lost at Rapid Vienna and Austria Vienna, the 2 big teams, and only 2 have got to UEFA Cup finals again, both losing. Rapid Vienna and Salzburg, Austria Salzburg in 1994. So it does feel that football in Austria is massive. Austria is a big football nation from its history, but I don't know, Benedikt. It feels that maybe this gap has really affected the legacy of what Austria could become, where the rest of the world has moved.
This is very true, like because like the Austrian national team, it had its after the Second World War, it had its ups with 1954, but the game that we are talking most about, and I think this also is the game against Germany in 1978. which was
Yes.
actually a dead rubber because we were smashed by Ernst Happel's Netherlands before 5-1, but we managed to throw out Germany. And this still, as it was a dead rubber, but still, this is referred like the Cordoba game is like the biggest game, and this is something that's
Yep.
what sums up Austrian football, that we are more proud of just that Germany went out of the competition, but we also went out. I mean, I think in 1978 we were ranked 7th, which is okay, but I think from the potential that because we had players who were close to world class during that time, because also Ernst Happel was a very, very good footballer. He scored 3 goals against Real Madrid. So there are some what ifs, what could have happened. Also quite recently during the Euros last year, like if the Turkish goalkeeper doesn't save the penalty and we go into the next round, because we were in this like group of
Strong
death
team.
and still managed to win it. Because Ralf Rangnick was doing an amazing job, like better job than he did at Manchester United.
I'm hoping, Benedikt, you haven't listened to the Algeria episode yet in our early days.
Of course I did. And, because it was one of the first.
Where we failed to talk about Algeria completely.
We still want to see some stats. We still want to see the stats on that one.
Yeah, but also like Austria media like to put that game, I mean the Austria-Germany game of 1982 into from an Austrian perspective. I can tell you that also like the commentator on the Austrian national TV back then, Robert Seeger, he also after like 15 minutes or 20 minutes when he noticed what is going on, he said, just switch off and do something else. This is pointless. So Austrians, they were ashamed of the team back then. So this is this is something. But yeah, it's yeah.
It's weird, isn't it? These two sort of iconic for completely different reasons. Austria-German games within consecutive World Cups, isn't it? One, arguably Austria's finest footballing moment, as you say, in a sort of losing cause, but but a fabulous moment. Who doesn't want to put one over that in that situation? And then 4 years later, the same side. You know, it's a less golden moment.
At times we had very good footballers. Also in the 80s, I think Prohaska was quite big in Italy, and Hans Krankel, who had this one crazy season at Barcelona. Yeah. We had those players, but it's still we never managed to come back and like be up there.
Well, we should get to ranking this team, I think. As a reminder, we have 5 categories of greatness, from all-time greats to the top to true greats beneath it. Our mid-tier category of touch greatness, edge of greatness, linkered greats beneath it. Jamie, where are you going to go?
Yeah, this is a really tricky one. This is heart and head stuff for me. It really is, in terms of where I am. I can't look beyond the legacy that this team has on football and the individuals involved. We've talked about Hugo Meisl and Jimmy Hogan and Matthias Sindelar, great goal scorers in Schau and Biscan. But when we normally do these things, we're kind of looking at a bit of glory, and they do win a major European trophy at the time, which is the European Central International Cup. That is seen as a major trophy in the forerunner to the Euros, as we've mentioned. They lose to Italy in a semi-final under questionable circumstances. There is an argument Italy could have been physically stronger than the Austrians, who at the time would have been playing this passing game. So there is a defence from Italy that maybe it was just the best team won on the day. And statistically, the two teams stack up as well. And I've measured their periods, and over that time, they both play around about 38, 39 games between 1930 and 34 final, and they're about the same in terms of what their output is. But I'm going to kick off, and I'm going to let my heart rule on this one and see where it takes us, because I think the importance of this team needs to be showcased. So I'm going to start off. I'm going to put them in bracket 2 as true greats. and see where that takes us.
That's quite a good start.
Benedikt, what's your view?
I'm torn in between. Like, of course, with my bias, I would probably go straight up there with and put them in the true greats category. Probably from a more rational perspective. Of course, they won like the European International Cup, but it was mainly like just the surrounding countries. I would have gone with a touch of greatness, but I'm biased, so I can go in true greats. So I'm going in true greats as well.
I love it. It's difficult. It's difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I've just put Oxford United aside that won the Milk
I'm
Cup.
glad you mentioned it.
It's such a great bonus. And as far as I'm aware, there is no huge football legacy. I can't claim that side started generations of total football following it. I like the head. It's definitely a head v heart thing. This is I think this is a forgotten side, and its impact it's a slightly lost side within football history. Timing works against it in absolutely every circumstance imaginable. Do you know? I'm gonna be carried away by the masses. Let's go for it. Let's say Austria, 1930-34, the Wunderteam. True great. The bit that tipped me over right at the edge. I love the picture that you mentioned. That is. There's just something fantastic about that, isn't there?
Do you know? There's a few photos of the team, and I don't know if it was a deliberate thing. Benedikt, maybe you can answer this, but they seem to, where you get your traditional football team, you have like 6 at the back, 5 at the front. In this one, they have 8 at the back, 3 at the front, and it seems to be a consistent thing. It's not just a one-off. There's a couple of pictures or a few where it's like that. It's a very deliberate thing, I think.
Yeah. Like I noticed that as well. Like I didn't find a specific reason why they lined up like that. I don't know. I mean, the painting was the famous painting was painted in 1948, I think, and it was sort of also like something to that we have something to be proud of.
We will put a picture of it on the on our socials when we put this out. But this is the Paul Meissner Wunderteam picture, and it is if you love it's just a fantastic to look at, so I can't recommend that enough. Excellent. Okay, we should leave it there. Benedikt, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Jamie, thank you as ever.
Yeah, extending the thanks, Benedikt. That's fantastic. I really enjoyed that. Thank you for sharing the history of this amazing team and Austrian football. I think it's our first Austrian team we've covered, so that's another country added to our growing list. So that's great.
Excellent. We will be back next week. I think we might be looking at a Chelsea side. If that's not happening, this bit will be edited out and we'll never know that we replaced something else. But who knows? But what's for sure is we will be back.